this is the Nerd Tea Diaries with Stephanie and Matarazzo, and I am the host of my show, The Nerd Tea, where I interview authors. This is the behind the scenes of my interview with Melissa Albert. She was my second guest and also my second interview. Now, I started recording these right after the interview. I don't do that now because the idea actually came after this interview, so I'm recording this afterward, but I did the interview on June 4th. Now, let's talk a little bit about Melissa Albert herself before I tell you a little bit about the behind the scenes of the interview. So, Melissa Albert is a YA author. She writes mostly paranormal type of YA, but I find her writing very sort of unsettling and a little spooky. It's not a horror or creepy or anything. It's not meant to be like scary writing, but she is very vivid in her mystery, and because you know that there is a sense of paranormal, you kind of get a little bit freaked out, and I absolutely love that about her. The first book I ever read by Melissa Albert was Our Crooked Hearts. This is actually the special edition of the novel. This is not how the actual cover looks like. I believe I got this in one of those book boxes. Yes, I did. This is the Bookish Box exclusive edition. So I actually had this in my bookshelf for quite some time. There was a time when I got this bookshelf behind me. I never had the space for a big bookshelf that I always wanted. And suddenly I had this bookshelf and I had adult money that I didn't have before. And I signed up for book boxes and I had to cancel them all because it was a little overwhelming. I started getting a lot of books and I didn't know anything about them at all. Didn't even know if I liked them or not. So this was when that was happening. So I had a lot of special edition books sitting in my shelf that I had never read. And previous to that, I was the kind of person that would actually only buy books after I had read them. And if I felt like I was gonna reread them, then I would buy them. And that was because A, I had no room, B, I had no money. Exception being if it was an author that I already loved or a series that I had already started, I would obviously buy the book before reading it. So this whole having a bunch of books in my bookshelf that I didn't know anything about authors that I knew nothing about or anything, was very new and very weird. And I was like, I need to start reading these books. I have my library organized in alphabetical order, so I thought, okay, let me just start off in the A's. Actually, I need to continue doing that. I don't think I continued on with trying to read on my bookshelf. That's for another time. Anyway, Melissa Albert, obviously she was right at the very front, so I picked up her book first. And I was in love. I could not put this book down. Like I said, I went in there blind. I knew nothing about the book, knew nothing about the author, no idea what was happening, but I loved it. And it really hooked me. Her writing hooked me. I was creeped out. I felt like I couldn't read it at night, even though, again, it's not a scary thing, but I'm a scaredy cat, so anything scares me, really. But it was just so well written, and I was super invested in the stories. Let me tell you a little bit about what Our Crooked Hearts is, and maybe then you can see why I had to talk to her. Secrets, lies, super bad choices, witchcraft. The suburbs, right now. 17-year-old Ivy's summer break kicks off with an accident. A punishment, a mystery, a stranger whose appearance in the middle of the road in the middle of the night heralds a string of increasingly unsettling events. As the days pass, Ivy grapples with an eerie offering, corroded memories, and a secret she's always known, that there's more to her mother than meets the eye. The city back then. Dana has always been perceptive, and the summer she turned 16, with the help of her best friend and an ambitious older girl, her gifts bloom into a heady fling with the supernatural. As the trio's aspiration darkens, they find themselves speeding towards a violent breaking point. Years after it began, Ivy and Donna's shared story will come down to a reckoning among a daughter, a mother, and the dark forces they never should have messed with. That is so intriguing. So essentially, it goes back and forth between Ivy, who's the daughter, and the weird, creepy things she's experiencing now, and the mother back when she was Ivy's age. And as the story goes on, you sort of start piecing together what happened. For the mother, it's going in order, and you sort of start finding out from when things were right to when things were wrong. And for Ivy, it's from when it was a mystery to when it's resolved. So it's really, really interesting. I was hooked. Then I went to Y'all Fest. This was back in 2023, Y'all Fest, and Melissa Albert was there. And I went up and I had to have her sign my book. See, she signed my book to Stephanie. And it just so happens that I got to her line kind of towards the end, and so there weren't actually people around so I could chat with her. And I literally asked her if she would be interested in being on my show. At the time, there was no show. It wasn't like I could show her an example or send her an email and have her look at past interviews or anything like that. It was literally me being like, this is an idea I have, an idea I've always wanted. I would love to chat with you. Are you available to chat? She gave me her contact information, and I obviously held off on it for a couple months while I sort of got myself together. This was at a time when it was just an idea, but I wanted it to be more than an idea. It didn't have a logo or I'm not sure if I had a name for it yet or anything like that, but it was something that I was like, I am doing it next year. So 2024, I was like, I'm doing it next year. And the Y'all Fest is at the end of the year. So this was November. And I was like, I'm doing it next year. I don't care. I'm starting it. So I was trying to first sort of collect authors to see if I even had enough to start, because I didn't want to just start it. I wanted to already have some authors, which is why you see that these interviews happen and then the actual episode didn't release until months later. So this was one of the first people that I like gauged interest with. She said okay. But obviously she just said okay, like it wasn't like this was set in stone. So again, I held off into contacting her for some time, and then I went ahead and I started the show, and I emailed any author that I kind of had any vague contact with. This included people who happened to be following me back on social media, or people like Melissa Albert who had given me her contact information in an event. At the time, I also started a book club. And so because I was in the middle of trying to figure out if I was going to be able to talk to Melissa Albert, I was like, cool, I already have to read her other books anyway, so I can have a proper conversation. And it just so happened that she had recently released another book called The Bad Ones. And so I thought, perfect, you know, I'm trying to study up on her. I need to read this book anyway. It just came out. Perfect. I made it my book club pick. I believe it was also like my second or third book club pick, because I started the Nerd Tea and the book club kind of around the same time. Actually, the name of the book club that I have is called Nerds of a Quill. You can find it on Goodreads, Fable, and Storygraph, or my Discord. But Nerds of a Quill, funny enough, was actually a name that I was considering for the podcast. I had a list of names, and I love the Nerds of a Quill, but I thought it was like too much for a podcast. So I was like, fuck, I'm gonna make it my book club. Anyway, so then I began reading this one, and I started realizing this is the book, because this was my second book of hers, that made me realize I really enjoy Melissa Albert's really creepy writing style. Let's see what it's about. Goddess, count to 5. In the morning, who's alive? In the course of a single winter's night, 4 people vanish without a trace across a small town. Nora's estranged best friend, Becca, is one of the lost. As Nora tries to untangle the truth of Becca's disappearance, she discovers a darkness in her town's past, as well as a string of coded messages Becca left for her to unravel. These clues lead Nora to a piece of local lore, a legendary goddess of forgotten origins who played a role in Nora and Becca's own childhood games. An arresting crossover horror fantasy threaded with dark magic, The Bad Ones is a poison pen love letter to semi-toxic best friendship, the occult power of childhood play and artistic creation, and the razor-thin line between make-believe and belief. It was very good, very creepy. Essentially, it's one of those things where, like, is there actually something going on? Is the best friend a victim? Is she the aggressor? Is there supernatural? Is there not supernatural? It was very good. And again, just like this one, it was like a lot of mystery and a lot of very vivid, sort of like unsettling descriptions. I absolutely loved it. And then ironically, I actually ended up reading her first books last. The Hazelwood, it's a duology. The Hazelwood is basically about folktales, like fables and stuff, and she released the book of all the folklore in the book. And I'm just gonna read you the description of this book because it's just the last one that I talked about with her. Obviously, it's her series. 17-year-old Alice Proserpine and her mother have spent most of Alice's life on the road, always one step ahead of the uncanny bad luck biting at their heels. But when Alice's grandmother, the reclusive author of a book of pitch dark fairy tales, dies alone on her estate, the Hazelwood, Alice discovers how bad her luck can really get. Her mother is stolen away by a figure who claims to come from the cruel supernatural world where her grandmother's stories are set. Alice's only lead is the message her mother left behind: stay away from the Hazelwood. Alice has long steered clear of her grandmother's cultish fans, but now she has no choice but to ally with her classmate and fairy tale superfan, Ellery Finch, who may have his own reasons for wanting to help her. To rescue her mother, Alice must venture first to the Hazelwood, and then into the world where her grandmother's fairy tales began, and where she might discover why her own story went so wrong. So this is basically mixing fairy tales with reality, and it's just amazing. It's amazing. It's a duology once again, and it's really great storytelling. Again, it just solidified that I really enjoy Melissa Albert's style of writing. It's very commercial writing, so it's very easy to follow, but at the same time, again, it's very descriptive, and you can almost hear and taste and smell what she's writing and like touch what she's writing. It's very good. And again, it's very unsettling and mysterious and a little like unnerving. So I absolutely loved it. This was, again, my second interview ever. So I had a lot of things to learn with her. She was great at her answers, very succinct. She was a journalist, so she kind of knew exactly what to do. I didn't need to explain a lot of things to her, which is great, but also made me feel a little self-conscious because I was learning still. I was second interview. I was still trying to figure out my style, figure out what I liked, what I didn't like, how to really conduct an interview, but like not make it like when I was a reporter, which was just I'm not part of the story at all. This is supposed to be a conversation. I had never had that before, but she had done it before. So I was very intimidated, but she was extremely sweet. You could tell she was very smart and very enthusiastic about talking about her books, obviously, as she should be. And yeah, I mean, it honestly, I think it went great. I was a little self-conscious about how long it went. This was back when I was like trying to desperately set it to be an hour. And obviously I have since sort of given up on the concept of how long my interviews should or shouldn't be. I mean, she didn't say anything, so I'm very glad about that. But yeah, that was my interview with her. I think it was such a great one. I loved that I got to read this author. I love that I just had the book in my bookshelf, and I'm so glad that I was able to discover her in just like such a wonderful way. And I really hope other people get to discover her as well, because honestly, just her style of writing is amazing. And again, even though it's YA, I would say that it's not just for people who are YA, especially Our Crooked Hearts has that whole like mother-daughter thing. So I do actually recommend that for any age, because I think there's a lot of what being a teenager or being an adult who's trying to put and leave their past behind. It has a lot of that. So I would definitely recommend Melissa Albert. And yeah, I hope that you watched the interview. And if you already did, I hope you enjoyed it. And this is just a little sneak peek of what was going on back then. I was still a mess. I was an absolute mess. Also, I didn't put it on now, but that day I was wearing a necklace that had like a little figurine. That is actually the goddess figurine, and I did it specifically because of the bad ones and the whole concept of the goddess in that book. So yeah, there's a little Easter egg. Anyway, that has been the Nerdy Diaries for my interview with Melissa Albert, my second interview ever for the Nerdy. Hope you've enjoyed this segment. See you on the next page.